This presentation is about EMPs, electromagnetic pulse, and the dangers of them and how to mitigate the potential by doing some preventative measures. When Newt Gingrich was running for president, he made quite a fuss about the threat of electromagnetic pulse attacks in his speeches and interviews. And he was quoted in the New York Times in December 11, 2011, when he was running for president. It says, Newt Gingrich is ringing alarm bells over what experts call electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, a poorly understood phenomena of the nuclear age. The idea is that if a nuclear weapon, lofted by a missile, were detonated in outer space high above the American heartland, it would set off a huge and crippling shockwave of electricity. Mr. Gingrich warns that it would fry electrical circuits from coast to coast, knocking out computers, electrical power, and cell phones. Everything from cars to hospitals would be knocked out. William Forstmann wrote a novel about an EMP and what would happen if it happened. It's called 1 Second After, and Newt Gingrich wrote the foreword to the book. Millions would die in the first week, Newt Gingrich wrote in the foreword to a space fiction thriller published in 2009 that described the imaginary EMP attack on the United States. 1 Second After is a best-selling novel and was also made into a movie. But this isn't just things of movie in Hollywood. This is reality. In October 23, 2017, Forbes magazine reported in an article titled North Korea EMP Attack Would Cause Massive U.S. Starvation, says Congressional Report. Quoting the article, a new congressional report contends that North Korea electromagnetic pulse EMP attack on the U.S. would ultimately wipe out 90% of the population. It continues, the consequences of such a detonation would be dire. Quote, the U.S. can sustain a population of 320 million people only because of modern technology, says Pry. An EMP that blacks out the electric grid for a year, decimating it, the critical infrastructure necessary to support such a large population. In 3 days, the food supply in the grocery stores would be consumed. In 30 days, natural food supply in regional warehouses would begin to spoil, says Pry. In 1 year, he contends that up to 90% of the population would perish from starvation, disease, and social collapse. Forbes magazine also ran an article that October 23, 2017, that said China has first strike capabilities to melt the U.S. power grid with an electromagnetic pulse weapon. Quoting the article, it says, last week, the EMP Task Force on National Homeland Security issued a scary report on China's ability to conduct an electromagnetic pulse attack on the United States. The key takeaway, according to Dr. Peter Pry, Executive Director of the task force, is that China now has super EMP weapons, knows how to protect itself against an EMP attack, and has developed protocols to conduct a first strike attack. China used stolen U.S. technology to develop at least 3 types of high-tech weapons to attack the electric grid and key technologies that could cause a surprise Pearl Harbor attack that could produce a deadly blackout to the entire country. Dr. Pry outlines how China has built a network of satellites, high-speed missiles, and super electromagnetic pulse weapons that could melt down our electric grid, fry critical communication, and even take out the ability of an aircraft carrier group to respond. January 24, 2019, the Washington Free Beacon ran an article that said, China, Russia building super EMP bombs for blackout warfare. commissioned to assess the threat to the United States from EMP attack for the first time, reveals details on how nuclear EMP weapons are integrated into military doctrines of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. Nuclear EMP attack is part of the military doctrines, plans, and exercises of Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran for a revolutionary new way of warfare against military forces and civilian critical infrastructures by cyber, sabotage, or EMP, the report states. This new way of warfare is called many things by many nations. In Russia, China, and Iran, it's called sixth-generation warfare, non-contact warfare, electronic warfare, total information warfare, and cyber warfare. Nuclear electronic warfare is also called blackout war because its effects on the electronic devices. EMP attacks will be carried out at such high altitudes that they will produce no blast and no immediate harmful effects on humans. Instead, 3 types of EMP waves in seconds damage electronics, and the strikes are regarded by adversaries as not an act of nuclear war. Potential adversaries understand that millions could die from long-term collateral effects from an EMP, and cyber attacks that cause protected blackout of national electric grids and other life-sustaining critical infrastructure, the report said. Super EMP bombs produce gamma rays that generate a peak EMP field of 200,000 volts per meter, enough to fry strategic communication and intelligence systems. China, Russia, and probably North Korea are said to have these arms, according to the Commission. The United States has no super EMP weapons in its nuclear arsenal. The bombs do not require accuracy, and the weapons do not require re-entry vehicle, heat shield, and shock absorbers required for nuclear warhead detonation in the atmosphere above targets. The weapons can be delivered through a variety of means, including satellites, long and medium-range missiles, short-range missiles launched by a freighter, from some cruise missiles or anti-ship missiles from jets or a commercial jetliner or a meteorological balloon. National Geographic produced a DVD and a TV show called Electronic Armageddon, which is a really well put together documentary on this threat to the United States and the things that can be done to mitigate this. In the Preparing for the Time of Trouble website, Part 2 and Part 4 talk about the lack of things that you would have if you didn't have electricity, and it talks about EMPs briefly and some ways to mitigate the effect of EMPs, and I'm going to steal a little bit of those presentations here as a review. First of all, if you think back 100 years ago, you can see from this picture that power was taken from the wind to run wells and things like that in the old days, and then now wind is used to make electricity. So a lot has changed in that period of time. And in the last 100 years, we've gone from kerosene lamps and that kind of thing to being very dependent on electricity at every level. So if we don't have electricity, we have a real problem. And there are some ways that electricity could get jeopardized. One is a natural phenomena called a solar flare that happens from the sun. You can see from this picture that the surface of the sun, and there are some bright spots that expand out, and those are solar flares, and they are a natural occurring phenomena on the sun, but sometimes there are real big ones, and they have the potential to have an impact on our Earth. In 1859, there was an event that was named after a amateur astronomer by the name of Richard Carrington. Now it's called the Carrington event. And September 1, 1859, Richard Carrington ascended into his private observatory attached to his country estate outside of London. After cranking up the dome's shutter to reveal the clear sky, he pointed his brass telescope towards the sun and began to sketch a cluster of enormous dark spots that freckled its surface. Suddenly, Carrington spotted what he described as two patches of intensely bright and white light, as illustrated on this picture, erupting from the sunspots. 5 minutes later, fireballs vanished, but within hours their impact was felt across the globe. That night, telegraph communications around the world began to fail. There were reports of sparks showering from telegraph machines, shocking operators and setting papers ablaze. All over the planet, colorful auroras, we often call those northern lights, illuminated the nighttime skies, glowing so brightly that birds began to chirp and laborers started their daily chores, believing that the sun had begun rising. Some thought the end of the world was at hand, but Carrington's naked eye had spotted the true cause of the bizarre happenings. A massive solar flare with the energy of 10 billion atomic bombs. The flare spewed electrified gas and subatomic particles towards Earth and resulted in a geomagnetic storm dubbed the Carrington event. Was the largest on record to have struck the planet. A solar flare, and this is more current, this is 2012. An X-class solar flare erupted from the sun's surface in 2012, an event that was still much, much lower in brightness and total energy output than the 1859 Carrington event, but which could still cause catastrophic geomagnetic storm if it struck the Earth in the right way. So, a solar flare, by comparison to an EMP, is a relatively benign problem. It has very little warning. It takes 8 minutes to travel from the sun to the Earth. It can damage satellites and can knock out radio communication, but it's not very dangerous on Earth. A CME, a coronal mass ejection, is a geomagnetic storm. You can see an artist's illustration of what this looks like. The Earth is in the middle of the picture, and you'll see these magnetic rings from the poles dancing around in this illustration. An example of this happened in 1989. March 13, there was a geomagnetic storm. The whole province of Quebec went black in 92 seconds and lasted for more than 9 hours from a geomagnetic storm triggered by a CME. So this particular geomagnetic storm was intense enough that it took down the whole grid for the province of Quebec. In a matter of 92 seconds, the whole grid was black, and it lasted for 9 hours. So notice again what a geomagnetic CME storm looks like compared to Earth. Earth is in the middle, and you've got these circles. Now, one time I was doing this presentation live at Washington camp meeting at Auburn, and someone in my class had just gone to the used book sale that morning and had purchased the following book, and it's called The Rise and Progress of Seventh-day Adventists by J.M. Lothborough, and it was printed in 1892. And what was really phenomenal is this person had just bought this vintage book, and in the book was this story of a strange appearance of the sun in December 1843 and September 1844. Each lasted for 2 hours. look at the similarity of that illustration to what we just saw about a CME. So anyway, I don't know if that was a CME, but it does have some similar appearance. Now the risk of a CME is a little bit more intense than the previous phenomena that I showed you. This does have advanced warning, anywhere from 18 hours to 5 days to get to Earth. This gives the NASA and NOAA opportunities to anticipate if there was going to be a CME, a coronal magnetic, I forgot what it means now. Anyway, a CME, if it happened and they were watching for it, they could warn the Earth of this happening. It does have the potential of taking out power grids, and although electronics are not damaged, unlike an EMP that we'll learn about in a minute. The date of the recording I'm doing right now is August 19, 2020. Interestingly, right now there is a CME warning from NASA and NOAA that will strike tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday, the 21st. So this is their prediction model, and you'll see where the yellow line is, that that's where they say it will impact, which is the beginning of the 20th, and it will go through the beginning of the 21st, according to this chart. They say space weather experts at NASA and NOAA are warning that a solar storm could strike the Earth on Thursday or Friday. In addition to triggering aurora, which is the northern lights, far from the poles. By the way, there are southern lights in the South Pole. Far from the poles, a stronger solar storm could also disrupt electrical generation systems, the electric grid, satellite communications, and radio signals. So depending on the intensity of this solar storm that is supposed to happen on the 20th of 2020, it does have the potential of creating some havoc with power generating, the electric grid, satellites, communications, and radio signals, and that would include GPS because they're satellite. A coronal mass ejection, or CME for short, that occurred yesterday. This is the same article. Yesterday would have been today is the 19th, so the article was on the 17th, and it said that the CME on the sun happened the day before. So notice that this CME, coronal mass ejection, happened at the sun. They observed it on the 16th. Is responsible for the potential solar storm, which they are predicting to come on the 20th and the 21st. So in this case, they are able to forewarn us 4 days in advance, which I thought was quite interesting. Okay, so is responsible for this potential solar storm NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center, and said the CME is anticipated to arrive early in the mid-UTC day of August 20. So, in the morning of the 20th, which is tomorrow based on my recording, that is when this would happen, potentially. So now let's switch to EMP. So we have seen two kinds of phenomena that are nature creating havoc with our electronics and our magnetism on the Earth. But now we're going to talk about EMP, which is an electromagnetic pulse. The difference is this is made generally by human tampering with nature. Roscoe Bartlett is now retired. He was a United States Senator, a congressman from Maryland, and he's a Seventh-day Adventist, and he was on many important committees for the U.S. government as one of 4 scientists at the time on Congress. He was on the subcommittee of Tactical Air and Land Forces. He was the chairman of that. He was the Subcommittee of Land Projection Forces. He was on the Committee of Space Science, Sea Power and Technology, Subcommittee on Research and Science Education, and Energy and the Environment. So this was a quite smart guy, and he was heavily concerned about EMPs and very well versed in it. And he said that if we had an EMP, that it would take, there are about 12 or 13 major substations in the United States. And if a nuclear blast by an enemy centrally located over the United States above the atmosphere was detonated, it would have the potential to knock out everything in the lower continental 48 states, everything electronic, everything microelectronic, all the cars, the planes, everything like that, all your phones, your computers, everything, refrigerators, anything that has a quote computer on it would potentially be destroyed. And that would result in catastrophic things. For instance, if the power grid went down as a result, he says there are 12 or 13 major substations, of which the main component for those substations would die in an EMP, and if they did, the whole grid would go down, and we as in America don't make those. So, and it's a 2-year waiting list under normal conditions to get those big systems. So, for all intents and purposes, an EMP could take the grid down permanently, at a minimum 2 or 3 years. Well, within 6 months, 3 days the grocery stores would be empty. Pretty soon there's looting and rioting and all kinds of stuff. And the projections of many people in the know are that within 6 months or a year, 90% of all population would be dead, either from starvation or sickness or social unrest. So Roscoe Bartlett did lots of crying for help and wolf at the government level, and it seemed to be somewhat a deaf ear. But time will tell if this happens. Now, more recently, March 15, 2018, the Department of Homeland Security, together with the FBI, announced that the Russian government hackers infiltrated critical infrastructures in the United States, including energy, nuclear, commercial facilities, water, aviation, and critical manufacturing sectors. So, where an EMP is a strategically placed atomic bomb centrally over the United States above the atmosphere, you wouldn't hear it, you wouldn't see it, but your car would quit driving and everything would quit that's electronic. This said in 2018 that not only that, but the Russian hackers had successfully infiltrated. So it's possible to take down the grid by an enemy without even doing an EMP. No bombing at all, just some geek on a computer. And that happened in California, and it's believed that that was kind of a dry run to see how successful they could be. According to the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI report, malicious Russian activities have been ongoing since at least March 2016. The Russian malware, which had been sitting in the control systems of various U.S. utilities, allowed the Russians to shut off power and sabotage the energy grids. Malware, by the way, is a piece of software that is embedded into a computer system by a hacker, and then it is turned on to do damage whenever it's wanted to be done. So it's saying that the Russians' malware that has been embedded in control system in United States power companies that allows the Russians to turn the power off and sabotage the energy grids. So it's possible to have the grid go down without it even being an EMP. So how are we dependent on electricity? All conveniences, appliances, computers, all communication, phone, internet, all modern transportation. If there's no electricity, the fuel pumps don't work, then you can't buy fuel, trucks don't roll, supplies don't happen, water supply, Municipal, city water have water up in a tank, but it takes a pump to push it up there and gravity to bring it to your house. So pretty soon that runs out. All food supply because the transportation quits. All purchases, cash registers aren't working. All lighting, even if you're in the country. So how do you prepare and make some strategies so you can limit the damage if there was an EMP? Remember, an EMP, unlike a cyber attack on the grid, doesn't just take the grid out, it takes out all microelectronics. So your communications are gone, your everything, medical machines, hospitals, everything doesn't work and is damaged, so it's not going to work, even if the power came back on. So here are some suggestions of what to do. Protecting most electronic appliances in your house against an EMP, if they were plugged in and in use, is probably hopeless. Unless your home has an efficient Faraday cage, you will have the proper filters and fast surge suppressors on the incoming line. So there are some ways you could help your house to not be damaged, your electronics, but very likely if you had any electronics plugged in, turned on, and there was an EMP, it would fry it. One option is this Faraday protective bag. Now, a Faraday bag or a Faraday cage, Faraday is the name of the gentleman who invented this concept of protecting things from an EMP. So a Faraday protective bag is an aluminum bag that is sealed, and it has a kind of a Velcro zipper type thing that has a flap that makes it sealed. And in that bag you could put a laptop, a camera, power supply, external hard drive, thumb drive, those kinds of things. But that's about it. Now, how well this would work, I'm not real sure, but there are some more proven methods to protecting. One here is called an EMP shield. There are a variety of companies that make things like this, but this one claims to be able to protect against an EMP for your whole house. It plugs into your electrical panel, as you can see in the lower left, and I've read reviews online, and some people say it works and some people question it, and the facts are we don't know, because there hasn't been an EMP in modern times. So if it didn't work and these guys were lying and the grid went down and all communication was down, you wouldn't be in a position to sue them anyway or get your money back. So they believe in the product, but the only way to know is when there's an EMP. On the other hand, if you spent $400 and invested in it and it worked, then it was worth it because it would save theoretically everything in your house. This is a commercially made Faraday cage, probably of the caliber of what the military might purchase. This is a little one for $4,000. They have other models that are more expensive. Obviously, you're not going to be doing something this expensive for a house. I talk about this in part 5 in the seminar. There was this gentleman I found on the internet. He's an electrical engineer, and he was wanting to know how to make a Faraday cage inexpensively. He thought maybe a metal garbage can with a tight-fitting lid would work. So he took an AM radio and put it in the can and tuned into a station, and then went to the base of a high-powered AM radio station antenna. And when he put the radio in the can, the sound quieted it down, but it didn't completely go away. So he thought, well, that's not good enough, so I'm going to double it. So here's an example of what he did. And it did work. This is a regular size metal garbage can with a metal lid. It's lined with something to insulate the items inside from the can. And then in the can goes a smaller garbage can, which is probably the size that a person with a horse might have feed in, that type of thing. And then it's lined, and then the items that are put in the bag, in the smaller can also be in a plastic bag. So now you've got a plastic bag holding items. You've got the smaller garbage can insulated. Then you've got the smaller garbage can insulated from the larger garbage can, and you have cardboard in the lids so that it's all insulated and double insulated. And this example here shows the lid on. I researched on the internet, and there is some thought that wiring, like this example here, to physically, electrically connect the lid to the body of that garbage can might be useful. There's also debate out there about whether it needs to be grounded, like a wire going to a ground rod or a ground side of an electric something, a water pipe or something like that that's metal. But it seems like that's probably not necessary from what I've read. So here's the question: what do you put in a Faraday cage? If you made one of these out of a couple garbage cans properly insulated, what would you put in it? Well, the goal is to put small items that are electronic that might be damaged by an EMP. Remember, an EMP damages items that have a microprocessor in it, a chip, circuit board. So maybe a radio, particularly an emergency band radio, not just AM, FM, but shortwave and weather and all of that, so that in that kind of dire emergency, you would have a useful bands on the radio. They also make some inexpensive little walkie-talkie type radios that are actually ham radios, and you can transmit on them, and they're like $25. So that kind of radio would also be useful. Also, another thing is if you have family members or friends nearby, they make these little Motorola walkie-talkie type radios that you could buy at Costco and stuff like that. And you might want something like that between family members. So there's some radio type things that could be in a Faraday cage. Flashlights, a power generating equipment such as a real small solar panel, an inverter, and maybe a battery and a charge controller. It'd have to be small enough to fit in a small garbage can. If you're a mechanic and you have a car that there's some computerized parts that you could have spares, you could put them in there. Problem is, modern cars probably have 10 computers on them, and most of us don't know what they are and how to do them. A computer, a laptop, and an external hard drive. And if you do that, the idea would be to store on that computer, on the hard drive, important information. One person I saw on the internet suggested a thumb drive with all of your important information, medical records, passports, driver's license, etc., etc. Good idea. Solar chargers, kind of related to power generating. Medical devices, if you're diabetic or some kind of a medical situation where you have a piece of equipment that's really important to your health, and it's small enough to fit in here, it'd be good to have a spare and have it in here. Cordless tools, compact fluorescent lights, might say LED lights for that matter, a clock, digital camera, voltmeter, DVD player, MP3 player. When I saw this list, I said, why would you want a DVD player and MP3 player? Well, not only if there's no electricity, you're probably going to be fairly bored compared to what you're used to having media at your fingertips. So if you had, for instance, the Bible and Ellen White DVD for studying, or MP3 could be music, or it could be audio podcasts of sermons or things like that, to give you something to feed your mind. So now here's the question: which of these things can you live without? Well, if you get right down to the very basics and you're just surviving, probably most of these things you could live without. If you tailored your day to do things when it's daylight and sleep when it's dark, you could get by without flashlights. You can live without a radio. You can live without electricity if you have to, car parts, solar chargers, medical device. Now, depending on your health situation, if you had a medical device that was really critical to your health, that was electronic, that would be something that I think would be a necessary thing on the list. Cordless tools, compact lights, clock, digital camera, voltmeter, DVD player, MP3 player. I think all those things you could live without if you had to. One comment about light bulbs. I learned recently from the internet that the only light bulbs that probably will not be affected by an EMP are regular old-fashioned incandescent light bulbs. And even they might, but they don't have any computerized stuff on them. Anyway, if your house had modern lights in them and they all blew out with an EMP, you might want to have some good old-fashioned light bulbs or some light bulbs in the Faraday cage just so you could have some spares. So when you think about all these things that could happen, the danger, the vulnerability of the electric grid and our lifestyle that we're used to, that there are two ways that they could be threatened to some level with natural phenomena from the sun and an EMP, which could be very devastating, could be done by an enemy. And we know that basically every enemy country of the United States, their first game plan in a war strategy is to do an EMP and cripple a country. So all of this subject can be a bit overwhelming and ominous. But God says, the Bible says in 2 Timothy 1:7, "For God hath not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind." So, when you read the book of Revelation and you read prophecies about the end times, it can be really scary. It can be overwhelming. It can be doom and gloom. But God doesn't want us to be discouraged. The whole point of the book of Revelation, it's a revelation of Jesus Christ. Jesus was telling John and us the future so that we will know what's coming, so we can do whatever preparation we need to do, but also learn to trust him every day so that we can not have to worry. We don't have to have a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. So my prayer is that you will consider this as you contemplate some of these end time things that we are encountering and considering on this website, and that you will not be overwhelmed, but will find ways to trust the Lord, to prove him, to test him, to trust him.